I'm really delighted to introduce today's guest speaker, whom I consider a true Renaissance person. Welcome, Arndt. I can't help but compare you with a glint in my eye to Leonardo da Vinci, who combined art and science to show how everything in the world is interconnected. You bring together neuroscience, biomimicry, design thinking, and agile methods to help companies and organizations create sustainable solutions for today's world. Your motto, "Don't just be successful, but be significant," reminds me of Gandhi's famous words, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." We are really excited to hear and learn from you today. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Arndt Pechstein.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Ia. Thank you for having me here, inviting me here to this evening to give this lecture, to give this keynote to a fantastic topic, I think, basically the bridge between art and business and how that can shape the world in a better world, because that's what I'm after, and I think that's what we are all after, and that's why I'm passionate to talk about this topic today. This is about future skills, about the skills we require with a particular focus, with a particular lens today, what we can learn from the arts, from artists, no matter what kind of artist, to inform business, to inform leadership, and therefore also to inform how we navigate the world. I've chosen as a background because I was thinking, what do I put in the background? And one of the most stunning artworks I've seen in the past years was from Refik Anadol. He had an exhibition in Berlin, and he's pretty famous, actually. He's like at the United Nations building. He's in like major places in the world, and he basically uses large surface areas, often buildings, entire buildings, where he depicts his digital art. And the interesting thing is he uses AI algorithms and basically uses, for instance, environmental data that are then displayed in that way, or old images. So he plays around with this intersection between actual art and technology, and to basically create art out of that. The role of artpreneurship in upskilling humankind for a better future. This is a particular focus of today. And before I get there, I mean, you already said so much about me, but I always find it interesting to know if someone speaks, what is the background, what's the lens through which that person looks at the world, because that informs also, of course, certain biases or certain backgrounds. And as you said, I did first, I studied biochemistry and biotechnology. That was my original studies. And then I did my PhD in neuroscience, studying the brain, one of probably the most complex system that we know. And I did this for 9.5 years. I've been living in Sweden and Stockholm for 3.5 years, did research at the Karolinska Institute. That's where my love and passion for Scandinavia comes from. Also, that's why I always like to be back also here in Finland. But then I decided I don't want to stay in academia for the rest of my life for various reasons. One being that we published a lot in our lab, but I didn't want to chase impact factors. I wanted to chase impact. So I thought, okay, what else can I do with my passion for science, with my passion for living systems, but also working more with people instead of doing wet lab research. And then I stumbled upon what you already mentioned, Ian. I will say a few words later about it, upon biomimicry, which is learning from living systems, learning from complex adaptive systems. And what can we learn from their strategies, from the functions they have developed, and how can we use that in an abstracted way for human problem solving in order to create more systemic, more sustainable solution and inform an entire new innovation space that we couldn't come up just by our own creativity basically extending the way we have done certain things in the past. And that then led me quickly to design thinking, because the question is, you may have a great idea, but in order to make an innovation, you always need to get people along, that they use it, that they feel the need for it. And therefore, user-centered innovation, of course, is a very critical thing. But that's not enough, because people are embedded in societies, people are embedded in whatever kind of organizations. So then very quickly I also went into organizational design and how we can transform organizations to make them ready for the future, and not in making more profit only. I mean, it's a good thing to, of course, get like money out of what you do, but for the sake of generating impact for society and for the world. And then the fourth subject that I'm around with for 5 years is because it really drives like also my passion. How can we empower individuals and people and society at large to take responsibility and to drive a change that we all need? And what are the skills that people need, both to actually be impactful, but also to actually be relevant in a world that is increasingly more dominated, or not dominated, but at least influenced by Gen AI and other technologies. So how can we develop basically a healthy balance between who we are as humans and how can we maybe take a new look at who we are as humans in the age of AI? So this is what comes together also in that talk, and that's the lenses through which I look. So just that you know the background a little bit and can interpret what I say. I want to start with a quote from Justin Trudeau, who once at the World Economic Forum said, "The pace of change has never been this fast." But then he added, "And yet it will never be this slow again." So what we are witnessing now, the change we're seeing now, despite the fact we think, and we are rightfully thinking so, it's incredibly fast, will be slower than what will come. And we may not like that, but that's a fact. That is what's happening. And I just want to give you a glimpse of how much that is changing. Because we all were more or less growing up, or at least influenced and almost conditioned in a world that worked on the basically hypothesis or assumption that we make predictions and we can plan somewhat into the future. This is how we basically still make up to today predictions and plans and develop strategies. Well, that has changed, and I want to show you with a little experiment. And some of you who have maybe seen me before, they know this experiment and they know a few slides, but then I will go deeper later. How much that now changes with that. And I ask you, I have a sheet of paper here, and I ask you, how many times do you think I can fold this by half, turn it 90 degrees, fold it by half again? What do you think? How many times is that possible?
120.
120? That will take a time, but I'll try. I always take the highest number, the 120, that's a pretty high number, so I better get started. Okay, I'll do once, 2 times, 3 times, 4, 5, 6. Let's see, I try 120 still. 7, that's difficult. So I can hardly fold it 7 times. Now this is, 2 centimeters thick? How thick do you think the stack of paper would be if I did it 50 times, 43 times more? 50, what do you think? Is it then 50 centimeters or 100, like a meter? Just guess. What do you think? Any guesses? You're so shy.
After this 120
All right. I guess no one would have overestimated it because it would be 150 million kilometers. 150 million kilometers. Now you wonder why. Because it doubles every single time. What we see here is exponential development. In the beginning, right here, and at the bottom of the curve, that doesn't seem like different from a linear change. But it quickly accelerates so much, and it's a hockey stick movement, that it's unimaginably fast. And then if I folded it one more time, 51 times, it would reach from the Earth to the Sun and back, right? Because that 150 million kilometers was the distance between Earth and Sun, and if I did it one more time, it would even be double the distance. And this is something we cannot comprehend. Our brains are not built to understand exponentiality. We are hardwired, and our language developed in that way, to think linearly. And therefore, we make predictions based on the experiences and the knowledge of the present and the past. And these predictions are further and further off what actually happens. And this gap gets wider and wider. Now, this is a problem. This is a dilemma. Because on the one hand, of course, we are surprised by new technology that maybe eases our life. On the other hand, though, it overwhelms us. And the question is, how do we solve this dilemma? How do we deal with a world that is accelerating where our brains, as individuals at least, cannot cope with that? And that is something that we really need to wrap our heads around, especially also because that is partially also, and to a large degree, driven by the technology. Especially technology drives this exponential change. And artificial intelligence is one part, and Gen AI is one part of that. And we talk a lot about AI, artificial intelligence nowadays. So much so that I wonder, why do we only talk about artificial intelligence? Shouldn't we also talk about HI, human intelligence, right? What happens to that? I mean, does it disappear, or do we want it to disappear? And we can do so many great things as human beings. For instance, who can read this? Everyone, right? Who can read this? It's so easy to read for us. No one ever taught us. You have to teach that a machine. But we don't have to. We never learned this in school, and we can abstract, we can pattern recognize. We're amazing beings. So we should look at things and rather focus on these things that machines can't do, instead of trying to compete with them. And there's so many things that we didn't learn in school that we are capable of, that we are better than machines, but we need to relearn them because we unlearned them. They were like, oftentimes, I work a lot with education. I don't only work with private industry. I work increasingly more with education in Germany, particularly. And a lot of things that happen there have happened not so much differently 100 years ago. And we are not oftentimes educating, we're conditioning people. And now we need to empower them. We need to make them ready for the future. We need to create an interest, like a curiosity about the future. That's what we need, that's what we want. So, and therefore, we need to be aware that knowledge over time decreases in value, because algorithms are much better in knowledge, in knowing stuff. But what we need is, on the one hand, critical thinking to assess the knowledge or the facts or whatever is given to us by algorithms. And on the other hand, we need to learn and use our intuition more. And that we never really appreciated so much, and we never learned, and we never deep dived into it. So learning what machines can't do is very critical, and I'll dive deeper into that. And then there's a second aspect to it. And this comes with a story. I have two little daughters. One just turned 8, the other one is 5. The other day, I was in a shoe store with both of them. And I went in, and for some reason, maybe this lady had a bad day, but she was not very amused when we came in. It felt as if we were disturbing the scenery. But I thought, well, I don't mind, I just want to buy shoes. But then the little one had a running nose, and I asked her, because I didn't have one, I asked her for tissue. And then this lady said something that really disturbed me. She said, we're a shoe store, we don't sell tissues. If you need a tissue, you go next door to the drugstore. I was really shocked, and I said, look, I could have bought shoes online. I get probably much more variety. I probably even get them cheaper than in your store, but I don't get one thing that I expected to get here. This is human interaction. And you didn't give me that. And we often discuss that machines replace humans. I don't think that is true. I think machines will replace people who don't use their humanity. And this word doesn't exist, that's why I made it up. But it's not just like, it's being human and in the humanity, in the collective, right? So we, like these people that don't use that, will lose their jobs to machines or to people who use it. So we need to become more human. That is what is necessary, but it's also a great opportunity, because machines take these things that are more rational and more logical and more analytical, and we can thrive and surface that potential that's laying within us. So we need both. We need AI and HI, but somehow there seems to be a skill gap between what we actually need and what we're actually having and what we were taught, especially. Why is that? And we stay in this comparison between machines and humans. If we look, and for the sake of ease, we take basically the comparison of a computer development from one of the very first computers in 1945. That was the ENIAC. It was a large room, 3.5 tons heavy, incredibly low computation power. 80 years later, we have artificial intelligence, we have cloud computing, we have distributed ledger technology, we have almost quantum computing. It's a quantum leap, literally, quantum leap in development on the technology side. Now let's look at humans in the same time span. 1945, this is how a classroom looked like. If you look at a classroom today, if we're lucky, it looks like this. Most, at least I talk about Germany mostly now, most schools don't have this digital equipment. And even if they had, if they put a teacher in front, if they have everyone in the same age group that are expected to learn the same thing at the same speed, they are graded in competitive mode, that doesn't create people who are passionate, who unfold their individual potential and their personality, who are curious about the future, who take risks and take responsibility and know their purpose. Instead, we had just a recent monitor. We get kids who are feeling extremely under pressure and kids who are afraid of the future. That's what happens currently. More than 1/4 of the kids in Germany feel exactly that way, and that's alarming. So why is that? And that's not just a phenomenon we see in school. We see that in societies as well. I mean, we also see it politically now with all the polarization and all these things. People feel overwhelmed. People feel fear. And fear on a longer time span, if you're constantly exposed to, for instance, negative news, regardless almost which news channel and outlet you look at, you get negative news. Why? It's a good business model. Our brains are 10 times more receptive to negative news than to positive news. So all the news and the headlines are negative. But if you get this every day and every time, like every day, several times, at some point, you forget that there's nice things, positive things happening as well. And you feel fearful about the future. And you feel overwhelmed and you feel helpless. Scientists call this phenomenon learned helplessness. What is that? Martin Seligman, maybe some of you have heard of him. He's one of the creators of the positive psychology, a psychology that doesn't look at deficits, but rather looks at how can we strengthen people's potentials and strengths. He did in the 70s already, and that's one of the reasons also why I left science, because we know so much and we do so little from what we know. In the 70s, so decades ago, he did an experiment together with his colleagues where they put dogs into a cage and they applied electric shocks on the bottom. Luckily, this wouldn't be approved by any ethical commission nowadays, but back then that was possible. What happened? The dogs tried to escape. In the cage, they could just go, like move in the cage. They realized it doesn't matter where they move, they get these electric shocks anyways. So eventually they surrendered to their fate and didn't move anymore. And that's expected. But the interesting thing is what happened when they changed the setup. When they changed it, they opened the cage and they wanted to see what happened to the dogs. And the interesting thing was that more than 50% of the dogs didn't leave the cage. Why? Because they learned moving doesn't matter. I can as well accept what happens to me. So objectively looking from the outside, they could have escaped, but they didn't because they learned they're helpless. And that's the same thing that happens to us people. If people don't go to election polls anymore because they think it doesn't matter whom I vote for, nothing changes anyways, that's learned helplessness. If people come into a company, have great ideas, and they're told 2-3 times, we've always done it this way, we don't have time for this, do your job. They voice their opinion once, 2 times, 3 times. 4th time they realize it doesn't matter if I say anything. And they may have the greatest idea, they will not voice it anymore. That's learned helplessness. And that frustrates people and that gets them to do just their job to get things done, but that makes them sick as well. So that's why we have an entire society at large that is like feeling helpless and overwhelmed. So we need to inspire them again. We need to get them out, especially in times that are totally foggy. We can't, as I showed you with the exponential, we can't predict and control anymore because we have uncertainty coming from 3 reasons. The first is these dynamics, these hyperdynamics. Things change at such a fast pace that we cannot predict, we cannot control, we cannot foresee it. So that basically is connected with a huge level of ambiguity, which means the traffic light can be at the same time red and green and we don't know what to do because there's so much information and so much change at all the time. Different people getting different information can come to different conclusions and based on what they know, be both right. So how do we deal with these dilemmas? That's a new phenomenon. We need to deal with tensions, with contradictions, with basically these kind of spectrum of possibilities and take decisions. And even our own decisions may have to be revised like a week later because we have a new set of information and data. And we have a large and increasing complexity because of all this technology, because of globalization, because of social networks and all these things coming together, converging. Complexity rises exponentially. The network complexity rises to the square of the number of nodes, so that gets exponential complexity. So this is a phenomenon we call VUCA. VUCA like is an acronym standing for these 4 terms that I just described. So the volatility, the fast change, the uncertainty because it's not predictable and it leaves us with this feeling of not being in control anymore. The complexity that I just mentioned, the ambiguity. The term actually comes from the Cold War. It actually comes from a military background for exactly these contexts where you cannot just do the regular control and manage thing, but where you have to deal with the situation and the context when it emerges and take decisions on the spot. Now, for those of you who have maybe seen me speak, I usually come up now with different strategies, how to deal with that. I just mentioned them, but I rather now want to embed what can we learn from artists and how does this relate to this concept, to this framework? Because that is really what's close to my heart. We have all these things that I've talked about. There is unpredictability, there is an extreme dynamic, but we have, as I said, like this, often this pessimism and this fear about the future. And this doesn't help us. It is something that slows us down or that creates things that we don't want. And it takes away all the happiness from the people and this like huge potential that resides within organizations and societies. So my intention is to spark this and to inspire again to be hopeful about the future, and not as in sitting there and waiting and hoping everything will be good, but this kind of active hope that we take responsibility and understand we all can make a difference. And if it's just a small one, by starting within our perimeter. And this betters our life and it betters the life those surrounding us, and eventually this will have ripple effects and an impact on the larger scale. Because things are as they are, and as Peter Drucker said, great management thought leader of the last century, the greatest danger in times of turbulence, not the turbulence, it's to act with yesterday's logic. So if we use the principles and the processes and the structures and the mental models of the past that are not fitting this new world, it cannot work and it will frustrate us and it will fail. So the question is, how do we overcome this? And these are the 4 things that I will use now as a framework that I will, and not just to deal with it as in accepting it, but rather taking it as an opportunity to kind of navigate the future and to co-create a future, a better future that we want. What do we need in times of volatility? And I changed the background picture because we get out of this dystopic picture with this boat in the ocean and rather look at the bird's perspective and think, okay, what can we do? So the first thing we can do is if everything changes, we need something that anchors us. It's a vision. These are positive narratives, things that give us a direction. If everything changes, we still need a direction to go in and something we aspire to. And we, as societies, I would argue, and many organizations, and even many individuals, do not have such a vision, a purpose that drives them, something big they believe in that motivates them, that unites them with others, that makes them curious and courageous, that allows them to focus, to do that, and don't do something else in order to get there. So that's number 1. The second thing that we need then to deal with uncertainty is we need to upskill and empower people, that they unfold their potential and that they feel agency again, that they're not feeling just like objects to whom change happens, but they feel like agents of their and our society's future. What we also need is then to deal with complexity is collaboration. We need to get out of this major paradigm of always competing and always comparing to others and rather think, okay, how can we gather? How can we use the collective and the potential of the greater collective to collaborate, to look at complex and wicked problems collaboratively, because we need this multi-perspectivity. And 4th, we need to deal with ambiguity. We need agility, adaptation. We need to be able to have hypotheses and run experiments and test things because we cannot plan on the long run. So rather have hypothesis and then test that hypothesis with an experiment. And if it fails, we learn something. And if it works, then we are a step further. And we do that iteratively. So these are the 4 steps. Why don't we do that? The question is, like, it sounds very straightforward, right? So I said there's the skill gap. And this is something that in the past 4 or 5 years, I've particularly put my focus on. How do we bridge this skill gap? What is it that is required that fills this gap, that empowers people to actually become these responsible agents to co-create their and our all future? We've published various books. This is one, the Future Skills Navigator. We had a previous Future Skills book, and we were working a lot on in frameworks and with assessments and things to fill the gap and to empower people. Because we believe in the age of AI, we're at the tipping point of redefining a new humanism. to rediscover. It's nothing new. It's actually a very old thing. It's nothing new, which is only possible through AI, but it's something that we can revalue and recognize in a world where we get shown our boundaries because algorithms can do certain things better than we do. But we should basically embark on old skills that we always had, but that we never used and appreciated because they differentiate us from machines. Because everything that can be automated or digitized will be. It's not a matter of if, but only when. It will happen. And now you could, again, it depends on the worldview, how you look at this and at everything. You can have a very negative and pessimistic and dystopian view at this and say, wow, now so many jobs will get lost if you read this. And yes, there will be jobs that get lost. And today we have much fewer horse carriage drivers than we had 100 years ago. Also back then, jobs were lost. But if that is true, and that's why I also tease you a little bit, to think the other way. If that is true as well. Everything that cannot be automated will become extremely valuable. And these are our human skills. But these are the skills that for the most part we don't learn in school. You don't get certificates for it that you maybe get the job on because you're compared to others. These are the skills that make us human beings and that differentiate us from machines. Now, this was the starting point also for this kind of future skill thought. How can we make it more tangible? What are these skills? So we thought, okay, what is a more holistic view of a human being? And yes, we are rational beings. We can think, we can analyze, we can logically understand things and describe things. But that's not all. But this is most part that we learn in school. For the most part, this is the paradigm we learn in. We're also emotional beings. We can feel, we can sense ourselves and others and the world. And we have not only an IQ, intelligence quotient, we also developed an EQ. So we know a bit about, okay, emotional intelligence is important too. But that again is not everything. We're more than this. We are spiritual beings. And when I say spiritual, I don't mean anything religious or esoteric. I mean connectedness. Connected to ourselves. We talk a lot nowadays, luckily, and more so, about mental health, about mindfulness, setting boundaries, being resilient. That has all to do with being connected to myself, being connected to my intuition, decision-making in a world where I don't have enough information to take a rational decision. Being connected to others. If I want to be a leader, I better be connected to others. I cannot lead people who I'm not connected to. And if I want to lead an organization, I need to be connected to a purpose that is bigger than myself or the team or even the organization at large. And then as humanity, we should be connected to living systems again, because if we're not, then we see, if we always step planetary boundaries, we see what happens. So all this connectedness is all about this spirituality that I'm talking about. And finally, and fourth, we are transformational. That means we can change things, we can affect change, we can have an impact, we can transform things. And we can do all these things. We can think and feel and be connected and transform on 4 levels. We can do this on a personal, intrapersonal level. I can develop myself, which is transform myself by learning and self-development. We can do this on a relational level, one-on-one. For instance, an emotional skill on a relational level would be empathy and compassion. Super important if I want to lead, if I want to raise kids, if I want to build relationships. Then we have a collective level, that's the we level, organizations, teams, families, even societies. And then we thought we need to have something more than this. It needs to go beyond that, because just a society is not enough. Or even our world community is not enough, because that again would be very anthropocentric. So we need to get this bridge to the larger living system. That's why we said we need a 4th layer, that's the planetary layer. And for the lack of a better pronoun, we called it all, because it entails more than just humans. It's the interaction of humans with living systems, because we're part of a globe that interacts as one large organism, essentially. And if you bring these 2 together, you have like a concept of 4x4, and that is basically then creating 16 classes of future skills. And all these cannot be automated. They can be assisted or augmented by technology, but they cannot be replaced. But most of them, and I don't go into detail now, I'll show you later some things, are the things that basically we don't learn in school, that we don't get certificates for, that you cannot measure and you shouldn't measure, because these are the things that make us human beings, that make us individual. And in our individuality, we can then contribute to a larger goal. Now, this is what I'm working on. This is what I'm doing a lot of work with. And then we talked about, okay, how do we now match that with art? What are the skills that art can teach us, that we can learn from art as human beings and in business? And then I thought, okay, how do I approach this? And I looked at the skills that I think and feel that are obvious. Like creativity is probably something that's very obvious. Everyone would say, okay, probably the first thing that pops to mind is creativity. Which is true, that's a very important thing, but there's more than this. And then I did some reading and I looked at certain studies and different things. And then I found quite many, and I first had them basically in a cloud, different skills. And then I thought, okay, how can we now, because I like structure, as I saw, I had these frameworks, I like some structure to make it a bit more tangible and memorizable also. So I thought, okay, how do these things now that I believe, and that's probably not a complete list, but these are some things that I think that are big time, that we can learn big time from art, and that are influencing how we run business, how we do society, how we run communities. How do they fit into the VUCA world that I presented before? So this was the question, how does it fit and how is it informed by art and what does it mean? Why is that important for business? So let's start with the vision part. I said this is a very important thing. And one thing that I would say that we can learn from art and that we need more than ever is imagination. Imagination, because our brain is incredible. In fact, we are the only species on that planet that can imagine non-existent future states, that can think about things that do not exist yet. No other species on our planet can do that. This ability is possible because it happens in our prefrontal cortex. Interestingly, that very region that is responsible for this imagination and visionary thinking is downregulated when we are in a constant state of fear. You can measure that, like neurologically. You can see brain activity, so that gets less active when we're in fear and when we are basically retracted and frustrated and in this kind of state of learned helplessness that we talked about. So my mission is somehow to get people back into this visionary state, that we imagine things, that we dream big, that we think about things that don't exist because, and that's this very interesting thing about our brain cannot distinguish between what we think and what is real. It becomes real for our body. I prove you that. This is a lemon. Now visualize, you see it here, visualize that lemon. Imagine you have this lemon, you cut it with a knife. You see the juice flowing out. You squeeze a little bit. And now imagine taking this lemon and biting into it and feeling this lemon juice on your lips and on your tongue. If you would measure the amount of saliva you have in your mouth now and the feeling, even the small muscles in your face, you feel it. You actually maybe even feel some tension in your jaw. That is because your brain was thinking about it. There's no lemon smell. There's no other clues about this lemon except for this image and your imagination. And this is how strong our brain is. And once we visualize something, we see things differently. We have other conversations. We use and leverage and seize other opportunities. So by imagining future states, we shift the likelihood for them to happen in their favor, just by visualizing them. And this is how everything worked in humanity. That's why we became so successful as a species, because we were the only species that could communicate about things that don't exist, agree on certain things that are non-existent. Even like most things that we have nowadays are non-existent. If you read Harari, some of you maybe have, he explains it in much more detail, but money doesn't exist. It's a collective agreement that this is some value. It's totally abstract, doesn't exist, but we can imagine, we can create, and we all agree to whatever fiat currency. It doesn't exist. And because we can do this, we can basically build collectives, build trust, build transactions, and so on. And that empowers us to do things that no other species can do. So imagination is one thing. What else? Curiosity, courage, and confidence. That's something we can learn big time from artists. Curiosity. All the things in art start from being curious about something, asking questions, not always having answers, maybe not even at all having the answer, but asking more and the right questions. And by a process trying to approach the answer maybe with a different way of looking at the world. being courageous to try new things, being bold to do things differently than other artists have done it before. And be confident that what I do is okay. I don't have to copy anyone. I don't have to follow anyone's lead necessarily. I can be inspired, but in art you can even steal, because it's like creative, like I always call it like idea shopping. It's something you see something, you get inspired, but you develop your own style. And that requires courage and confidence that, well, I can do this. I want to do this. I express what I feel, how I see the world. And connected, the courage connected with the imagination that we had before, and this is probably one of the biggest things that art do, is that they develop and depict or display in whatever way future states, utopias. They don't describe necessarily the world as it is, but how it could be. And that's a very powerful thing that we can learn from the arts. And with this confidence, that is something that is super important and again measurable, because I always like to connect it also to science, because that is connected to a growth mindset, a belief that I can do that, I can become better at something. There is no such thing like a creative person and someone who is not creative and will never be. It doesn't exist. Although some people think I'm creative or I'm not creative, especially, or I'm not good at math, or I can't do that, whatever it is. That is most likely because maybe you had a bad experience and not so good coping mechanism, because maybe some early teacher told you, that's not your thing, or even your parents may have told you, we were not good at math, that's also not your thing, you better do language. And then you go through life and you keep thinking that you're not good at math. And whenever you encounter a math problem, you think, I'm not good at this, you better do this. You don't even try to learn, to engage in that kind of obstacle. So you cannot learn. This mindset, thinking that you cannot do this or you cannot learn this, or thinking about others, they are smart and they're not smart. They are lazy or they're not lazy. They are good at this or they are not good at this. This is what we call fixed mindset. The opposite would be a growth mindset. A growth mindset is the conviction that through learning, through failure, through exposure to obstacles, we get better at something. And we can improve pretty much at anything. Carol Dweck and her team do research on that. They actually coined that term, growth mindset. And they did basically invent an inventory where you can basically assess people who are leaning towards a fixed mindset, who are rather leaning towards a growth mindset. They did this with 7th graders, pupils in school. And they had 2 groups then, one group who's rather leaning towards fixed mindset, one group who's rather leaning towards growth mindset. And then they followed their grades over 2 years, math grades. And they figured out, well, those who have a fixed mindset, they don't improve, regardless of performance level. Whereas those who have a growth mindset, they improve. So just the way you think about yourself is a predictor for whether or not you learn and improve and you get better at something, regardless of performance level, by the way. And this is not only true for the individual, that is also true across individuals. And that I found even more interesting. There was another study done by Rosenthal and Jacobson. They did the following. They told teachers that they have done an intelligence quotient, an IQ test, on all the pupils in the class. And they've identified a particular set of pupils that have a particular high IQ. And they ask these teachers to support and empower and basically teach them and basically nurture them, particularly to basically nurture their intelligence. They did this after 8 months. They measured the IQ another time, and they figured out this group had a significant increase in the IQ. Well, maybe expected, except that the sample who got into this empowered group and who didn't was not based on IQ, it was totally randomized. So the mere fact that this group of pupils, of kids, was supported, believed in, empowered, led to an outcome that they improved. Whatever the IQ measures, that's debatable, but anyways, that's the test now, increased that test result, regardless of their initial IQ. And that's fascinating. So we can empower each other. So we can have confidence, like as I said, from the art, and we can have this confidence in others and make us individually and collectively grow. What else do artists have? Purpose and meaning. That's a very purposeful work they do. They have some intention. They want to express something. They want to describe something. They want to communicate something. They want to spread beauty. I mean, there are different intentions, but there's a purpose behind it. It's a highly passionate and purposeful thing. And oftentimes there's a meaning behind things, even if it's not necessarily communicated, but there is a deep meaning in that thing that they do. And purpose and meaning is something that, again, scientifically is proven to contribute to well-being, to individual happiness, but also to performance. That's super interesting. There was a study being done. Adam Grant did this. There's many interesting books to read from him if you're interested in that. And what he did was he basically looked at fundraisers. They looked at how much money do they raise from alumni, and they had two groups. And then they had these two groups do different things. One group was reading 4 texts about their personal benefits. So if they do the job, they have the potential to grow, the potential to climb up the career ladder. This was what the content of these 4 letters or 4 texts was about. The other group were given 4 texts that told them why their work is so important. For instance, one letter was about a girl who thanked these fundraisers, saying, I'm so grateful for what you do because only because of you I could afford studying this. I couldn't have afforded this, and this changed my life. And then they checked what happens to the work results. So this was how they did it before. There was a slight difference, but just because it was randomized. Interesting is the delta in each group. And this is remarkable. Those who read things about personal benefit didn't improve, didn't change. But those who read these things, why their job is important, what's the purpose of what they do, more than doubled their outcomes, the funds raised. And that's interesting. So it contributes to our own happiness, but it also has an impact on the outcomes of what we do. And that is another thing that we can learn from art. Now, what else? Awe and beauty. I think this we oftentimes lost. We see that in art. We are in a gallery and we think, wow, we're blown away from beauty or from the colors or from the shapes or whatever it is, or from a sound, or regardless what kind of art it is. But we have so much beauty and things that are awe-inspiring in life that we don't pay attention to and that we take for granted. Technically speaking, like ourselves, that our body functions, that we live in freedom, all these things we could be grateful for. But also when we go outside, it's not just a tree. It's a marvelous thing. If you look at all these things and if you take that time and are mindful about it, it's just amazing what happens there. And how, if you think then about it, how many species are living on this tree, this is in itself already awe-inspiring. But let me give you something that is outside this world, really, because I guess no one here in this room has ever probably heard about it, or if so, just a few. I want to tell you about 2 organisms. And this is just an example because nature is full of such examples. This is a bacterium. It's called Vibrio fischeri. It's a bacterium that that basically has signal molecules that communicate, like through these signal molecules, almost like hormones that we use, they communicate with each other. And usually they are not shining like this. They are not like chemiluminescent. But once they reach a certain density, because of that signal molecule they send out, they suddenly, at the same time, in synchronicity, start to light up. That's a super primitive, as we would say, organism compared to what we are in terms of complexity, but they can do this incredible thing already. And you think, okay, well, this is amazing. Well, it gets better. This is just the starting point of that story, because there's another chap. This is the Hawaiian bobtail squid. This animal lives in the brackish water, in like knee-deep water, and it's usually buried in the sand during the daytime to be protected from its predators. It has, and that's interesting, it has under its eyes little pockets. In these pockets, it has these bacteria that I just showed you before that grow in these pockets. During the day, they wouldn't, even if you wouldn't see it during daylight because it's lighting, but you wouldn't, if you would make it dark, they wouldn't shine because the concentration of this bacteria is too low to actually shine. But in a cycle, over the day, they accumulate because I don't know if they double like an E. coli every 20 minutes. I don't know the propagation time, but let's say every hour they double or something. In the evening when it's dark, they are at a density when they start to glow. So why is that interesting for this bob test quid, you may wonder? Now, these are little torches. With these lights, the bob test quid can basically, in the dark water, shed light on things and hunt. But it can also do, and that's interesting, it can do more than this, it has little light sensors on its back, by which it measures how much moonlight, for instance, coming into the water. And with this information, it can open these torches just so much that it can erase its own shadow, that it's not seen for its predators. And then when it gets morning again, it goes into the sand, it expels most of these bacteria, just keeps a few, and then the whole cycle starts anew. So this is an incredible example for symbiosis, for complexity, for beauty. It's just amazing. And these are just things that we see and start to understand now. And we know so many of them. And this is something we should be so fascinated about and we should be so grateful for. And sadly, as we all know, we destroy so many habitats and species and so on because of what we do, because we're not connected to any of these things. A discipline that tries to change this is called biomimicry. That's why I was so passionate about that and studied that, which means we look into living systems. Biomimicry comes from the old Greek, bios and mimesis, for imitating life. It's not about making something that looks like life, but rather something that functions like life. So you look at living systems, you try to understand what is the question that was asked to develop this thing as an answer, because basically we see all the answers around us, but we don't know the questions. It's like Jeopardy. And then once you find it out, you try to abstract it, because we have to size it or scale it in a way it's not trivial, and then you use it to human problem solving. I give you one example. And this is a humpback whale, beautiful creature. And you see at the front side of its flippers, it has these weird shapes and weird bumps. Now you may wonder, why is that? Because if we look at airplane wings or wind turbine wings, they're always straight. Why are they straight? Because we try to avoid turbulences in water or in air. Because if it's a straight leading edge, then there is more laminar flow, less turbulence, and there's less resistance. That's what we think, and that's what physics tells us also. But apparently this animal does it differently. Why? And a researcher, funnily, he is a marine researcher by the name Frank Fish. That's a funny thing. He put this in a wind channel, and he figured out that these, what they call tubercles, these bumps, they do create turbulences, but in such a way that there are little vortices formed that stabilize the flow across the wing, which helps the animal to be maneuver much more easily and swim smaller circles for its hunting behavior. But if you put this design on wind turbines or electric ventilation systems, or even in Lenovo into the fans, then you can make the blades shorter or use fewer of them. Like the fans in Lenovo have half the number of ribs compared to other vents. So you save about 50% of the material. They are more energy efficient, they're more silent, just because you changed the structure. And that's something you wouldn't come up with as an engineer, because you think, okay, how can I optimize? How can I make it more straight? How can I make the surface more flat and even? You wouldn't think, how can I bring a structure on top to create turbulence? It's upside down thinking. And that's where we can learn big time from these kind of systems. But what that requires is the awe, the appreciation, and the beauty to see that in the first place. And this is something we can learn from the arts. Well, now we go to upskilling. What can we learn about upskilling? Well, the first thing we can learn from art is empathy and kindness. Because what we see is somehow connecting to something. We talked about spiritual skills before, about emotional skills. Empathy, being connected to others, feeling others. And what we do feel, and that's why it's so attractive for us to go to galleries or to like operas or whatever art we go to, we're emotionally connected to that thing. It speaks to us, and it's often the stories being told are deeply human. And they tell stories, various stories, but they basically, oftentimes, they either show the conflict and the contradictions and something that should basically raise questions, or they show how the world should be, as I said before. And this is something, again, we can learn on two levels. First of all, it's something, empathy towards ourselves. We should learn to be kinder to ourselves, because that's where empathy starts. Leadership also starts from self-leadership. And if we're not kind to ourselves, if we're not empathetic with ourselves, if we're too harsh against ourselves, then we can impossibly be kind and mindful to others in our reactions and in building relationships. So, and that luckily is also something that is growing in awareness, and we see more and more people who do reflection, who do self-development, who have conversations or reflections about these things, like what are limiting beliefs that I hold me back from unfolding my potential? What are certain patterns and triggers that I have, why I react the same way, why I always tend to meet the same people and have the same relationships that maybe don't work? Because it's not always the other people, it's something that is basically a mirror, that is basically a reflection of who I am and what can I change in order to change relationships. So it has a lot to do with empathy. So art is nothing else but a mirror as well, because we see who we are in that art piece. And everyone takes something else from an art piece, or hears something else, or feels something else. So that is always an interaction, and that's something we can again learn for ourselves and for our interaction with others. Then a big thing is vulnerability. Why? Because an artist basically being completely authentic and transparent about, even if you don't know it, but what they give and put in there is really vulnerable, because very often it's deeply emotional, it's deeply personal. So that's the biggest act of vulnerability. And this is something that is very, very important, and we should all have that, because we always thought in the past and up to today, oftentimes, we think vulnerability is a weakness. But it's actually not. It's a very big strength, because to be open about the things I'm vulnerable about requires a lot of strength. And science shows that leaders who are vulnerable and show weakness and are open about things they don't know, they are more trusted, people are more loyal to them, because they are felt as more authentic. And again, that can be also shown, like Google together, Rework did this with Google. They looked at what makes up high-performance teams. So they did the Google project Aristotle, maybe some of you have heard. And the number one predictor of high-performance teams is psychological safety, which is basically part of it is vulnerability, is trust, and all these things. That's the number one criterion for a high-performance team. It's not the knowledge, it's not the experience, it's not the strength, but it's exactly the opposite. It's the vulnerability, the honesty, the transparency, authenticity. This is whom you want to work with, because then you're open as well. And then you try things, because then you can be courageous, what we showed before, what we discussed before. If you know that if you run an experiment and it fails, it's nothing to be ashamed of, nothing you will be judged for, but it's a learning opportunity. That requires courage, that requires vulnerability, it requires trust. And that makes up good, innovative, and performant teams. What else? Playfulness. And now we are at creativity as well. Playfulness is a very, very important thing. And artists oftentimes get very playful. They try things out and they use colors or sounds or shapes or materials or whatever it is. And they bring it into new connection. Oftentimes, innovation is nothing new per se. It's the association of things that may have existed in a different way that creates new value. And the same in arts. And this kind of creativity is actually directly influenced and enhanced by the immersion with art or with artist thinking. And companies like Google, they do these things. There's this artist in residence. Like Google invites artists to do work there with them, to learn from them, to get inspired, to get an exchange in order to boost this coherence and collective and creativity and innovation. And there's many companies who do that, but it's interesting how art can inform business and vice versa. So then we get to collaboration. What about collaboration? And one thing I've already talked about is connectedness, in a way. Where we talked about the spiritual part, and that's, I think, the essence of also building trustful collaboration in any sense. Like in any way we have relationships, and also in the work relationship. And this connectedness to other people, being not only empathetic, but also compassionate, understanding what they need, being like seeing them, talking to them on eye level, having horizontal relationships, not vertical relationships. And oftentimes we think this is nothing we can really do, but in fact, this is deeply human. And there's a concept, maybe some of you know, it's called Ubuntu. In many local languages on the African continent, Ubuntu means the same thing. It means I am because you are. And there goes the story that an anthropologist was somewhere in basically this kind of tribe, and he offered a kid a basket full of fruits. and said to a group of kids, actually, I put this basket under a tree, and whoever is first can have the whole basket. And what supposedly, so goes the story, the kids did, they took their hands and they slowly walked there, sat around the basket and ate the fruits. And then the researcher, the scientist, was asking, why didn't any one of you run? You could have had the whole fruits for yourself. And then the kid said, well, how could I enjoy the food if the others are hungry? And this is a concept that we see in many old cultures, especially this kind of sharing. I was happy to meet the Penan people on Borneo. And they have this thing, regardless of gender, regardless of age, they share equally. They do not wage wars against others because they are nomadic tribes. They don't wage wars. And they even communicate on the trees that they used which tree needs to recover, regenerate, that the others don't overuse it, so that the entire system can stay in place. This is connectedness, not just to other people, but also to the living surrounding we live in, to sustain and regenerate the surrounding, that we can keep it, not just for ourselves, but for future generations, for others to come. And this is something, again, we can learn from the arts, because connectedness, us being connected, artists being connected to the art piece, artists being connected to the feelings, the canvas, the colors, the materials, all these things, that is something we can learn. And what we also can learn is not only human nature, but increasingly also technology. Because right now we are oftentimes fighting this war, we against the machines that I depicted before, but in the middle is this wicked problem, all these challenges that we have. So we shouldn't fight and say, oh, they are against us. See all the risks, obviously. We should be very responsible and careful with what we do. But we should think, okay, how can we do this together? We are all in this, and technology can help us. It won't solve it. Technology will not solve climate crisis. Technology will not solve the inequality. So that's something we need to want and then do. But technology can help us and accelerate solutions if we decide to do so. So pull in the same direction. And that also has to do with connectedness. What else? We have storytelling. Art is storytelling. Regardless if it's a canvas, if it's a music piece, if it's a poem, it tells a story. And by stories we inspire, by stories we captivate, by stories we stick with a message. And it carries on, and it basically allows people to take action after they've heard the story or pass on that story. So these common narratives are super powerful. And I remember a TED talk from Bill Gates where he talked about the Malaria Foundation. And then he did great storytelling, and he had a jar in front. You see it here. And he talked about the mosquitoes, and he said, well, sadly, mosquitoes are in the sub-Saharan countries. That's where climate conditions allow them to be. But malaria is not a problem for the poor. Everyone can get it. I have some mosquitoes here. And then he opened the jar. And you see the people's faces changing in the audience, because now they think, oh, did this guy now really release mosquitoes here? So this is a very powerful storytelling. And then in the end, he released it and said, okay, we're not infected mosquitoes, but it creates a sense of relevance suddenly. And with these kind of emotional roller coasting and stories, you can captivate audiences. You can basically create emotions, and through these emotions transport a message that sticks. And that is something that art does all the time. Through storytelling and other means, you create engagement and inspiration. So that is something where you pass on a message, like a seed that basically is planted in someone else and lives on and is propagated. And that's something that art can do. And I really like, for instance, Banksy's work. That is a very inspiring work because it's provocative, it's interesting in a way, and it speaks without much language, or oftentimes without language at all, and often has a very political message as well. And he said, I like the quote, art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. So that's really what the power of art is. And it can inspire and give hope and basically empower, especially those who maybe need it most. And that's a very powerful thing that we can learn. And inspiration and basically this kind of mobilization is something that is so powerful, it can change future states. And we've seen that over and over again, and oftentimes led and started by minorities. Inspirational people who have a dream. They don't have a plan, by the way. It's not the mind, it's a dream, it's their heart. And they inspire others, and they create a momentum, and that changes the future. So Margaret Mead has once said, never underestimate the the power of a few committed citizens, because that is the only thing that has ever changed the world. And it's really often started from this inspiration. And finally, agility to deal with ambiguity. What do we have here? We need, and this is what we can learn again, big time from the arts, improvisation. To be okay with unreadiness, to be okay with unpredictability. Improvisation is something that we need way more, because we always strive for perfection and for readiness. But in a world that changes all the time, by the time it's ready, because it takes a while, and it's based oftentimes on a prediction and a plan, the world has turned, and whatever was meant to be perfect is not perfect anymore, because the world doesn't fit to this level of perfectness. So rather, move quicker, try things out, improvise, don't wait too long, dare to decide and move forward. So we need more jazz and not so much orchestras, where everyone plays the same thing the same time over and over again. And in companies, we have this often. I mean, we work a lot with processes in companies where we have waterfall and like long planning procedures. And that frustrates people, and it doesn't lead to better results, often the opposite. And rather, you need to do shorter intervals and iterative planning and these kind of things. Then we have ambiguity tolerance. That's a very important thing. To deal with ambiguity, to be okay that the light can be red and green at the same time, and to take a decision anyways and see, okay, how within that spectrum can I take a decision? And sometimes it's not about dissolving this dilemma, but rather keeping the tension, because the opportunity lies within that tension between two different things. And that is something, in German I call it Nebelkompetenz. It's a word we came up with, which describes basically, in English translate, fog mastery, fog competence, like to deal with foggy environments. You navigate on site. You don't have a map which tells you where to end and how to get there, but rather you have a hypothesis. You take a step carefully. You see if that step carries your weight. If it does, you put your foot down. If not, you pivot and you put it somewhere else. And you have a North Star, your vision that we talked about earlier, that guides your direction, that you don't run in circles. And you run experiments, because otherwise you can't know. But standstill is not an option, because the fog never clears. It rather gets worse. Then, and we are almost at the end, we can learn systems thinking, learning connections. That's what artists do all the time, connecting things that are seemingly not belonging together. The most brilliant art is always connecting. Also, music pieces, if you blend two different styles, this is where the beauty happens, I don't know, I like hip hop. If you mix hip hop with classics, beautiful pieces. You may not like that, you may like other things, but or old art, new art, old art style, new materials. Very interesting thing. And thinking, connecting dots. Systems thinking, super important, because it's not about the individual parts of a system, it's always the connection. And I showed this forest image because there's something beautiful systemically happening in this forest, or in any forest for that matter. And it's not only the photosynthesis that we all know of and are aware of, but actually what happens under the soil, or in the soil, under the surface. And that is what we call a mycorrhiza. That's a symbiosis between mushroom mycelium and roots. There's a super dense network where the tree basically provides water, nutrients like sugar to the mushroom, and the mushroom provides water to the trees. In 1 square meter of forest floor, there's up to 10,000 kilometers of that network. That's a distance from here to Singapore or something, in 1 square meter. But through this network, and that's where it becomes exciting, trees also exchange information. They send molecules, signal molecules, similar to what we have as hormones, from one end of the forest to another. For instance, if there is a pathogen coming, or a pest, or like an insect coming and destroying parts of the trees, they signal to trees far apart, you better form certain toxins or certain bitter substances to fend off this pest. They also provide nutrients to adjacent trees. If there's a small tree, like here on the right side, they give them sugar. That's in stark contrast to what we do. We wouldn't support that. This tree would maybe take our light and take our water. No, this big tree shares because it knows, well, it's not intelligent, but systemically evolved this way. It strengthens the resilience of the entire system if they share. So it's systems thinking. Well, this is not thinking, but that's what we need to understand things are connected, interconnected. They call this the Wood Wide Web, the Internet of the Forest, Wood Wide Web. And finally, that's the last one I have for you, rule breaking. Artists break rules all the time. They think impossible futures. They criticize reality. They show stark contrast. They provoke. They break rules in terms of what materials have been traditionally used or which kind of styles are mixed. So rule breaking is a very, very common thing in the arts. And that's something we can learn. And this is something that I can make you feel. I want you to fold your arms, please. All right. I want you to release these arms again and then fold them again. Who of you has folded their arms the same time, both times? Hands up. As you usually probably do it. Same way, right over left or left over right. Most hands are up. Now I ask you to try it the other way around. So as you usually don't do it. All right. I see smiles. I hear it always on the noise level. I asked 3 questions. Who of you had to actively think about how do I do this? Hands up. For whom it took a bit longer than the natural version? And who feels at least a slight level of discomfort? All right, that's almost all hands up. This is what we call learning, and this is rule breaking. Rule breaking because doing it the natural way, which is depending on how you learned it, it has nothing to do with left or right-handedness. That is because your brain formed patterns that you don't think about, because it saves energy through this coherent state, what we call it. Once you do it differently, you have to actively think about it. New synapses have to meet and form. Requires more energy, requires active thinking, takes longer, feels uncomfortable. But that is something that we need to do. In a world that changes, learning is something that we have to constantly do. Learn, unlearn, relearn. That's the cycle. And that's unavoidable. But unfortunately, we didn't learn this in school, but it's fun. Learning is a great thing. If you don't have to write an exam and get graded and evaluated by someone, learning is amazing. And we can do this throughout lifetime. And that's something, again, we should learn from the arts. So summarizing this, we have seen this before. And then I was not looking actually at the framework, but I was thinking, what are the things that we can learn from arts? And now I was thinking, okay, where are they positioned in this framework? And then I put them there. And we see that was not planned. I just looked at where are the most clusters. What are the skills if I put them into the different classes? And it appears from those that I picked, and that's not a scientific thing, right? That is just something that was obvious, evident, and from reading a few studies and things. It seems that art seems to inform more the spiritual and the transformative areas than the rational and emotional. I don't know if that means anything. That's, again, no solid science. That's just like a first pattern that I saw. But I found that interesting. So these are the skills that we can learn from the arts that I thought interesting. And then I was doing one more thing. I talked about human and AI, so I thought I end with AI. So what I did, I fed ChatGPT these skills and said, can you come up with an acronym that basically summarizes that so that my audience can remember? And that's very interesting what came up now. It gave me that. With some iterations, because I had to adjust 2 things. I said storytelling, so this is now telling stories. I think we have another thinking in systems instead of systems thinking, so I played a bit around with it. But it gave me that. That is really cool. And that really fits art and business and change and stands for a better world. This is what I wanted to share. I think we can learn a lot from the arts. Thank you very much.
In this type of a world, people are quite occupied in their mind. And I would see that art and these types of engagements with artists would bring in exactly this sort of a mind space, new angles of thinking for leaders, stepping out of their comfort zone also, and seeing world from an unexpected points of view. Yeah, definitely.
I've used to work in the data and analytics environment as well, and with the complex use cases where we deliver data analytics products. The best results we have gained is when we bring in multidisciplinary teams. Then, for example, bringing in artists and creative thinking and this kind of imagination could really open up people's thinking and, the neurocells, in a sense, to be more brave and courageous to step out of their kind of stubborn, maybe proven thinking style.
And I do think that what Arndt was talking about today is that there is a future in which a lot of the skill set that we currently hold dear and deem valuable, which is on knowledge-based, is no longer going to be the qualities that we're going to be defining as human qualities. They're going to be ones that we are going to sort of outsource to machines. So in order for people to find more meaningful roles in the companies and collaborate with machines and new technology, we do need those creative skills. And I think that artists can help show the way in which these are used and anyone can use them.